We're about to get started with our art talk. Thank you all so much for being here. We're so excited to celebrate our summer exhibitions with you. I'm Amanda Sroka. I'm the senior curator here at ICALA. I'm pretty fresh. I started here in September of last year. And I feel so thankful that these three artists are the first three shows that I really have the pleasure and privilege and delight to get to oversee. So with that, we're going to be in conversation today. I have Alberta Whittle, who's with us from Glasgow. Yes. Carmen Argote, who is with us here in Los Angeles. And Trương Công Tùng, who is here with us from Vietnam. Hi, Tùng. So just a little overview. We're going to have Alberta and Carmen both share a little bit about their work. I'll do some threading of the connections amongst their practices. And then we're going to open this up for questions. And then afterwards, there's a special that will be taking place in the project room. So with that, maybe we all take a seat, get settled, and I'll hand it over to Alberta.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to begin by reading a poem. Poetry's become almost a linchpin in my practice recently, and Between a Whisper and a Cry, which is the film that's showing next door, is where I first began thinking about poetry and text. A black footprint is a beautiful thing. Curved like a comma, a black footprint demands a pause, a defiant longer breath. Exhale. Thwarting demands to render me translucent, respectable, quiet, pliant, shadowed, forgiving and giving. I see the soil resisting and glean the strength to rest. But all I can taste is salt. I must remember to keep breathing. I must remember to keep breathing. I must remember to keep breathing. To breathe easier, I must search inside for slowness, for stillness that recollects a refuge I can barely remember. So I am birthing a love song for my mother and for my grandmothers. A new love song that is draped in honeyed sweetness and forgets the nightmare of tall ships seizing passage across our waters. Ships that dredge chasms of despair and dig endless graves while starching our dreams. Transplanted, I stand resolute against a white background. Find resistance at the bottom. Find resistance at the bottom. Find resistance at the bottom. How many are suffocating under the rot of plaster and eugenics? Resist. Pause. Breathe. I stumble and begin to vibrate with an urgent hum. Resistance from the bottom. Inhale and exhale. Urgent memories are throbbing at my core, willing interspecies transmissions. Bleached death masks haunt my nightmares and leave me gasping. Bleached death masks haunt my nightmares and leave me gasping. Gasping. Take a deep breath and try to clear the messiness in your head. Inhale and fill your belly with hope and light. Exhale and let your shoulders drop. Listening again, I hear drum beats and chest thumps, loud cackles of laughter that make your cheeks hurt. But most of all, I hear whispers that croon, I love you. I love you. Perhaps it's not enough to say it. How can this love song keep you safe? Even when you don't always feel free. Perhaps we can feel free when we sleep. I love you.
Thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. When I began working on Between a Whisper and a Cry, it came about during a really horrific time in the weather. The hurricane season was growing longer and longer, wider and wider, yet no one really seemed to be paying any attention. And with my family still living in Barbados, and my worries and fears that our house and our homes were going to be destroyed, the ambivalence of Europe really seemed deafening. And I wanted to make a work which could speak of those fears, of that anticipation of grief, but also to think about how we build family and how survival and love can really be at the center of building family. And so the film is divided into chapters which recall an ancient mariner's rhyme: June too soon, July stand by, August come it must, September remember, October all over. And these months are part of the hurricane season. So June too soon means it's still too early. And October all over is technically when the hurricane season should have come to a close. But what we now see is the hurricane season actually begins sometimes in February, and it can go on until almost Christmas. And what I'm hoping for in this work is that it can encourage a conversation, across barriers and boundaries, to really think about how we live with freedom and what that actually means when there's so much precarity and loss that happens because of the weather, but how conversations can sometimes really feel closed or removed from us. And it's really about trying to think about how we can build a greater empathy for each other and build different ways of being together. Amanda shared the article in the newspaper this week about how on the East Coast they're now dealing with the ash, but also the smoke and the real deterioration in air quality. And of course, they're looking to you guys to share knowledge of what that means to survive and live with the threat of fires, forest fires, drought. And I think that there's something really special about showing the work here, because whilst my work is so much about the water and thinking about histories of migration, but also thinking about the water as being a place of deep healing, spiritual healing and memory, the water is so close to us in LA. The beach is not that far away, but yet there's still drought. And yet there's still the risk and the kind of anticipation of something coming for us through the weather. I'm really just very excited to think also about how these stories are so interlinked. And some of the methods which I've been using in the installation, because this is the first time the work is being shown with this installation, and it's been really trying to make space for the knowledge that I'm gaining from the community at ICA about the locality of these conversations. And so I wanted to bring in these beaded works which would correspond with the chains that are around the feet of the installation, to think also about ties like blood ties, but also about the ties of family and how greater rituals. So the beadwork comes from a deep space of meditation and ritual, and they're meant to be talismans, but also, again, to speak of how we make connection, and that's really the hope in the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alberta. I feel like it's really wonderful that with the poem, it was kind of rooting us all in the body with kind of an inhale and an exhale, and that's so much a part of also the very conversations that your work raises, is so much about its effect on our bodies and on our bodies across generations. So thank you for that. We're going to ask Carmen to also share a little bit about your work and your process, and then we'll talk about it together.
I was taking in Alberta's poem and really thinking about like feeling this idea of, you know, what is freedom? What does that mean for me? And like, what is like these words, like these big words like healing or freedom, and it's like I keep thinking about fear and grief that are these things that are behind those words, you know, and like those things that we sort of don't want to experience, and sometimes we don't know that we don't want to experience. They're too much, and I was also thinking about the hand and making, and something that the work has taught me is that there's you know, generationally, like I think about my mother and my grandmother, and I imagine actually like my grandmother's mother, and kind of like all these generational makers. It was like this technology of being able to hold something that retained a sense of self, even among all these different traumas, even within like all the hurricanes that might happen in our own lives, in our own selves, that cause numbness or that cause us not to feel. And so these were the things that kind of came to mind for me. And I think the work that you see in the gallery in many ways has been my own journey of conversing with both myself and others. And when I say others, like it can be writers, it can be psychologists like Winnicott, or you know, just C.G. Jung, other voices in the world that have sort of wanted to converse with the human condition. And as I kind of entered through that, like, I think one of the first books that I was listening to on one of my walks, I do very long walks, like 2-hour walks, 3-hour walks sometimes, was the Red Book. And from there, just sort of building into, you know, thinking about stages of development, child psychology, going into Winnicott, going into like Mary McGuire gave me a Jacqueline Rose book, going into that and playing in reality. So like all of these other voices, Octavia Butler, and like all of these sort of intersections that are actually like the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhist practice. And then like, I'm like, oh wow. And then like the making, like indigenous knowing, we're all kind of using these tools to be able to I guess to get a wider breadth of our own sense of being, like and I want to talk a little bit about the title, because I really feel like the title is in many ways is like a piece in the show for me. It's rooted in going on walks with my inner child. So there's the feral one that, you know, usually like to my right, and this inner child was actually very hard to find within myself. I was able to kind of like separate that inner child, and that one doesn't speak, and it was actually kind of like a scary inner child for myself. And next to the feral one is the little one. So the feral one is I won't abandon you. The little one next to the feral one is I see you. And there's one that's sort of like in front to the right of me, and that's like a 20-year-old me, and that's we are safe. And so thinking about understanding how to untie and untangle these patterns of self within myself is my remothering process, because I'm able to attune to the different parts of self that maybe we're not able to be attuned to. So That's what I mean by like a remothering, and like we can all sort of like go into ourselves and give ourselves like the attention, attunement, appreciation, allowing to be ourselves, to like basically live our whole being. And I think that that's where the work is kind of like, that's the stages of development, like there, you know, and I'm still in it, so you're seeing me still in process. One of where the work has taken me is to this question of asking, well, okay, so you're doing this inner work, Carmen, and you're going on walks with your inner child, and you're feeling your feelings, and you're able to actually like you know, feel grieving for the, you know, and you're able to not see other people as like video game, you know, people in the world, and you're in your body now what, you know? And I'm like, oh wow, well the art is asking me to, you know, how can the work be more generous? And then the sort of answer that the art it gave me was, well, it's in relationships where you can put these things into practice. And so then it's like, that's what's led me to this idea of collaboration and being able to be in relationship, like my mother's one of the collaborators, being in relationship in a more intimate way, and like, you know, also with friends, like how can we continue this processing back and forth collectively to release our fears, right? Because that for me is like freedom, and that for me is healing. And the making is a technology that I feel very fortunate, and it's been a grace that like I feel like that's part of my like what's been carried through generationally for me is this I don't know, like facility with materials and touch and the hand. So you see the hand very present in the work. You also see braiding very present in the work. And I had no idea why I was being driven to braid. And then the work told me that it was about integration, and that it was the integration of the three. And I'm like, the three who? You know, like, and then I had been doing these rubbings, and it was the word mother. So it's like the three could be mother, her, other. You know, who's mother, who's other who, you know, like these questions. But the three could also be, you know, any, like, there's a lot of trinities in spiritual practices. So it really has to do with, you know, it can be like the spirit world, the earthly realm, the unconscious. It can be the mother, virgin, queen. It can be, you know, like all of these trinities, but it's really the integration of self. Is it maybe like the mind, the heart, and the stomach? You know, is it like the spiritual self, the body, and, you know. So it's like all these questions kind of keep coming up through the making of the work, and I think that's what you see. It's this constant conversation with the self that's allowing me to be more present here, like in this moment with you, and to like offer this work that can be a catalyst for talking about our own inner transformations, our own moments where we like surrender and let go, and and maybe like are deconstructed and then reconstructed. You know, so like what all of our journeys are different, right? But there's like something that I'm noticing in all of these voices that I'm gravitating towards, that have to do with like that braiding and wholeness within ourselves. And then the images that you see, like, you know, this is like a selection of works, but this work's been going on for 3 years, processing this, like remothering, and actually all of the work that you see here is not included in the show, but there's because there's so much more. But it's like, and each organization or each project that's been a part of my processing, you know, this is sort of like a thank you. So this is Stairwell. I work a lot with Cynthia Vargas, who has, we're doing mind mapping for like my practice. And there's Mary McGuire, who is one of the collaborators who held this salon where I was able to, do these actions in their home. Marcus Nazario, who opened up this incubation, I called it the Womb, which was like a trailer at 18th Street Arts Center. This residency in New Jersey at Art Yard, where I was able to almost take the comforting objects and embody them. So it's been a process, and I think that the works that you see are in many ways a documentation of that process. The work is also its own documentation. I think that's, maybe we can.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. I think what's so amazing in what both of you just shared here, which makes my job really easy for making connections beyond what the work speaks to, but is this kind of ancestral ways of knowing and indigenous practices and ways of knowing that get, passed down. And I was thinking, as you were talking, one of the kind of questions in my mind coming into this was to have, each of you share a little bit about what braiding in particular, or what these kind of ritual actions of braiding, of coiling, of beading in your work, which Alberta, those beaded works, you refer to them as a kind of like a navel string, and Carmen, when we were talking about some of these braided in making one of the works that was made just a week prior to opening the show with the collaborators who Carmen invited into the process, there was kind of one long braided piece that was like the umbilical cord. And so I think it's quite interesting that this kind of like connector, and to your point of like connection across bloodlines and kinship, I would love for you both to speak a little bit about, Carmen, you shared about braiding, but to speak maybe in a deeper way about also how these actions and these forms kind of connect to those ways of knowing.
It's funny because braiding also pops up in my work, and I was so excited to see how you use it in yours, because when I was looking at your work, there were these sense of all of these multiple selves and like constant transformation, but also how like some of the work, they feel like chrysalises. They feel like chrysalises, or somehow almost like receptacles or pods or ways for the body to be held, which I really appreciated. And for me, when I make my beaded works, in some ways it's very much, it's a family tradition. My mother makes jewelry, and some of my earliest memories are actually of watching her bead. And she's someone who would always bring me into her practice. So I'd be sitting at her knee, and she would be passing me beads, and I would get to wear them, and I would just adorn myself with all of these beads. But also when I started, really thinking about incorporating them into my practice, which is it's a new technique, it's a new instinct to do. I think it really was because, again, of like thinking about how do I connect with my ancestors? How do I connect with my mother who lives in Barbados and I'm in Scotland, or I'm now in LA? And this is a way for me to call her with me. It's a way for her to call that tradition into my present state. And in the Caribbean, we have a tradition where it doesn't happen as much now, where your navel string is actually buried, and then a tree is planted, and this is a way, again, of rooting you, but also it's a way of thinking about how your life will flourish or what will happen to you. And, in this work, which is very much about precarity, it's also so important to think about how we root ourselves. And I imagine the installation as being an underwater realm, so it's also an anchor. So actually when we walk into the installation, we're walking at the bottom of the ocean. And then there are these navel strings that are buried, but also seaweed and also ropes to anchor boats and ships. So they have these multiple ways of being and calling forth imagery that I wanted to engage the audience with. But also every time I bead, there are certain patterns that I find myself following because I'm obsessed with numbers, so I can only have certain numbers in the beads, and there can only be three navel strings hanging, and so each one becomes this way for me to also calm myself, because the beading is also so deeply calming and meditative. So often, I have a mantra that maybe I'm saying, a private message for myself, a private message for the viewer about a hope of what they can take in this work. And it's very much, I don't know, it's such a kind of like bodily thing. It's this thingness that I feel like it's only, the hand has to be visible. Like when you were talking about the hand and the visibility of the hand in the making, that's something which I really identify with, because I want there to be a sense of the body when you're moving through the installations. And when I look at your work, the hand is so present, like you're so present. And I wrote like this note when I was thinking about your work, about this phrase like working out, but also working in. And when like you were at school and you'd have to kind of show your working out of how you came to an answer, it reminded me of that, but for yourself, but also this gift of an invitation for the audience that you're sharing your workings out with us, and I found myself like taking those messages really to heart. And there was this phrase used, let it dissipate. And I just thought, that's so useful for me, but also like really cold to my heart because of how you were speaking about shame and blame and letting that dissipate. I really felt that.
And it's like what are the tools that allow you that allow dissipation? And I think one of the things, maybe Carmen, as Alberta was talking, and like kind of this relationship to the hand and to beading as this kind of a moving through or processing. I think of like prayer or power beads too, as like kind of, but Carmen, as you're here and you're standing up here with these oak galls, which are made from oak galls are like tree scabs that kind of ultimately fall out and dry up and make these forms. That's a dissipation tool maybe too. So maybe you could speak about that.
This is where I'm just currently like putting my anxiety. And one of the interesting things is like. My mother makes jewelry as well, and like so like the hand, but I feel like I'm putting this work out there because I'm not unique in the patterning, and I think that that's something that the art has taught me, that there's like these patterns, whether they're rooted in colonialism or they're rooted in like these traumas that we hold generationally, let's say, and the making in the hand, or like stories, very often these things retain a part of ourselves to hold it safe, to keep it safe, the way that like our inner selves keep us safe, and we have these protectors, and we have like like these things that like we go numb, like all of these things are to really to ensure our survival. And I think that so are these patterns of behavior, patterns of neglect, patterns of abandonment, patterns, whatever they may be. And as I've been processing and like letting these things go and going through the making and like putting these energies into the works, because that's what the comforting objects began as, like maybe transference objects, where the first one was like, I was in a therapy session and my therapist was like, hold a pillow, and I was really interested in how I could transfer my inner child self into the pillow and I could still be an adult holding the child. And then as the process kind of progressed, how the making of them put this energy. So if there was a behavior or if there was something that I wanted to have held for me. The object would hold that for me. And it was comforting in that I was not alone in this. And I think that that's something that's really interesting to me. And one of the reasons I'm so excited to share the work is that it's like, oh wow, like it's like you're also like this, or we have the same pattern. Like, it's been amazing with my mom and I, like, as we've been talking, to see like the generational pain and process that in the making. And we're like, wow, we've always been doing arts and crafts and it's been really great, but there's a deeper layer, you know, like there's a deeper layer there. It's been holding a part of ourselves that we are ready to approach it, then it can be transformative. Just like when you're ready to approach a certain book and read it or reread it, it's transformative. Or like a work of art, or it takes that relationship, and going back to relationship, right? Like timing, like being able to like receive it is like, you know, is like something else that's really interesting too. Yeah. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm going to hold these beads down.
It's going to be wrapped up in the beads.
That's it.
I feel like, you know, it's interesting what you say about timing too, because, you know, for you, Carmen, the body of work that you see, this is not working for me. The body of work that you see in the galleries is kind of, you know, 3 years in the making, but it's at a certain like threshold within the series. And it's, you know, you have been describing walking through and seeing like, you're like revisiting these moments, or you're like, you also can see your own growth in kind of looking back, and then now seeing where you are in Alberta. You shared in terms of, you know, this is a work from, thanks. Thank you, Tanya. You shared, you know, this is a work that was made in 2019, but also, you know, being able to revisit it in the context of a very different, you know, place and land than where it was made and where it was first presented. And so I think that like timing is also, you know, an awareness of that timing is also an offering in some ways.
Definitely. I mean, for me, I really enjoy sometimes the opportunity to revisit existing pieces, because the work is really about a conversation. So the conversations which I've been having with Carmen and with Amanda and Anne and different people here have informed this work. And that means that the work has that space to always grow and adapt depending on the conversations that are happening. So from 2019 to now we're in 2023, you know, 4 years later, there's now not necessarily a reevaluation, but it's a point of now thinking, okay, where are we going? Where have we come from? Where are we hoping the conversations are going to go? But also, because of the location shift, that has brought new ideas to what I want to forefront in the work. And for me, that forefronting is, again, like you say, it's about that intimacy and like really reflecting on what it means to be human, what it means to be free. And I always date my work. Like, I'm obsessively dating the work. Like the day, I mean, even when I was doing the little thing to say, come to the show, I like had to put 2023 on it. It was impossible for me to say it without saying, okay, we're in 2023. You know, don't forget, don't make any mistake, we're in 2023. So we're in 2023 right now. Where are we gonna be in 2024? Where are we going? Where will the conversations have built? And I think in that revision, or freedom to actually amend and digest and process, it makes me think also about that idea of healing. And the work for me is very much about how I navigate my own healing, but also how we can open up the scope for healing. And something which really struck me in your work, Carmen, is this idea of the wrapping. Because there's so much wrapping that happens. You know, even like the books which, you know, there's this really interesting restraint, yet abundance in your process. You know, I can really feel that restraint, that you've kind of pared certain things down, but also giving the audience so much. And that wrapping for me, at one point it felt like, are we bandaging? Is this a way of kind of actually acknowledging the wound by bandaging it? But then there's also a shrouding that happens, and maybe that's a departure from oneself to another. but also it kind of becomes also the potential for pleasure in that wrapping too, that I found myself really curious about, because there are all those aspects of play. And one work in particular, I don't know if you mind me asking this question, is that piece where I don't know what the materials are, and I really want to know what the materials are, that are almost like pelted or thrown at the wall, and then parts of them kind of glide down, and that play, but also the emotions that are going on behind that, like, it feels very loaded, but also somehow I'm like so curious about it.
The collective action or the?
I think so, because Amanda was
The one
part
right
of
on the
it.
wall.
So it's paper mache. It's
One looks like a pizza roll for sure. Once you see the show, you'll
Yeah.
see. Looks like pizza dough.
so it's well that specific one was made on my birthday with my collaborators a week before the show opened. We had a little gathering here, and where I was wrapped and binded by my really good friends, and then I was ready to receive love, which was in the form of paper mache being thrown at me. And watching us negotiate, sometimes without words, sometimes with behaviors and with our power dynamics and our care and our so just being in relationship. So that's one of my edges that I'm trying to grow towards, and that's after the ripe child works, which are the other paper mache ones with the red child. That those are all and I mean the root of that is based in like spitballs.
I was like, tell the story.
Like throwing spitballs up in the girls' bathroom at school, and being caught by the teacher and being told that this is what separates good kids from rotten kids, and this idea of how do you take these moments of trauma and shame, combined with that joy of throwing and pleasure of throwing, and how do you transform those? And so going from a rotten child to a ripe child, how do we transform our narratives, right? And through material, see what and then so much so that we can use them in relationship. It's it's a question too.
Yeah, I feel like once you know that story, it's also interesting, the rotten to ripe has such a relationship too with fruit or food or that idea of consumption, and then the work has so much of
there's
that.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot of food in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bananas and a lot of food, and I mean, food is also part of my processing was going through an eating disorder as part of my healing, and also eating fruit to become fruit. I mean, these ideas of where when it gets stuck in a loop, right? And how do you change the routes or the patterns? And it's so interesting how it can manifest in so many ways. I mean, that's just one way. But there's in countless ways in which these behaviors manifest, but the root is the same, whether it's it's rooted in some fear of what, of so it's that questioning. But the food is just also material of life, right? Because digestion, processing, like you were saying, and like drinking water and urinating, all of these I get excited. But it really, it's the stuff of life. And that it reminds me of when I go walking and I'm sweating and I'm moving my body, and it's just metabolizing the thoughts, metabolizing water, metabolizing these patterns, getting stuff moving. Not, and it's so interesting, that binding. I mean, that's surprising to me in the work too. I'm why are all these figures bounded? Was I bounded? Why am I binding? why am I restrained? And it's like restrained is also sexy. It's like, it's like feeling all of this, you know, like, yeah.
Oh yeah, like the swaddling of a baby.
Yeah, it's all of it. Yeah.
Well, I think that, you know, your relationship to materials is also, you know, whether it's like often organic materials or like the incorporation of the shells, or I mean, I think how walking for you, even walking around LA, changed what materials you incorporated into the show. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Of course. So there's a moment in the film where you see me with a huge blue tarp, and I'm with my friend, and we're on this beach on the Isle of Lewis, which is very far north, and in a strange way, that part of the film signifies a huge departure on what I thought the film was going to be about and what it actually became, because I'd heard this idea that jazz was birthed through Gaelic-speaking parishioners in back line singing on the Isle of Lewis. And I just thought, this is so crazy, but I have to go to Lewis and I have to see actually, like, you know, like to hear the back line singing, and it is incredible. It is incredible. I still don't see that relationship to jazz necessarily, but it was incredible to go there, and I went there with dear friends and loved ones and collaborators, and we found ourselves on the beach with this tarp. And it became a bit of a game to try and catch the wind, but also it became a sail. And I was really curious about how that tarp, which I'm so familiar with in the hurricane season especially, and how we use it to protect our homes, but also how it became this sail and a holder of the wind, a holder of that energy, but then became a refuge. So there's this moment then when Tulani, my dear friend, and I were underneath the tarp seeking refuge. And it became this almost like a portal or a vessel to take us to the bottom of the ocean, because all we see is blue. We're entirely in this lens of blue at the bottom of the sea. And walking around LA and, you know, the conditions of houselessness that are so abundant, I really recalled that moment in the film, and again started thinking about, you know, how do we create refuge? How do we create these safe spaces against the elements in these times of great vulnerability and precarity? And I wanted to find a way to refer to them almost again in this organic way of wind catching, but also protection. And so rather than have them isolated or referencing really deliberately the structures of the tents or of how they're used to reinforce tents, I wanted them to become more organic, so they're very much handled and crumpled, but also wrapped with the beads, with the talismans to protect them and create this space of safety. And that chapter is the one chapter I changed from the beginning. And again, this is part of that love of revision, because that chapter was about 2 minutes long. Like it was like a really brief moment of blue. And I was like, no, we need to see more of this. So after it was premiered and shown at the theater, it then, for its installation, you know, it grew this other 5 minutes. And that is what I think the visit to Lewis really showed me in terms of jazz, is about that improvisation. Is about how jazz teaches you to improvise and actually listen, and it is all call and response. And even if I went to Lewis and did nothing with the material of the back line singers, it made me respond in a much more poetic way to the land, and the land became what was the material and potentially the ancient knowledge, because my dad's family came from Lewis. They're MacLeods. Yeah. And we only realized that when we were there, because I had no idea about that. And I thought, okay, somehow ancestors, somehow body knowledge was telling me I needed to go to Lewis, even if it was not the experience or the material or the research that I thought I was going to be gathering there. It became something much more spiritual and much more about me allowing myself to somehow access those memories that are incredibly hidden from me, like incredibly, incredibly hidden. Yeah, so protected. Yeah, so protected. And that blue and that idea of feeling blue is now this thread that really, it occupies so much of my thinking when I approach so much of my work, and thinking about being encased in blue, being encased in that wateriness, what that wateriness can do. Like every time I'm home in Barbados, I'm at the beach all the time because I want to reconnect with that spiritual side of myself and baptize myself, or try and find ways to breathe underwater and be a fish, you know, and really, you know, like be at one with that side of myself, and that side of ancestral knowledge that I'm constantly trying to seek out and tease out in these encounters.
I feel I love that you just shared that, because I think something that hopefully all of us will experience in a couple minutes in the project room is very much about, for Tung, that artist, is also so much about, through materials like land and water, is like connecting at that deep spiritual level. I'm really mindful of time, and I feel like this is, we do really want to open it up for questions, if there are any questions for either artist, before we wrap up. Anyone got some questions?
Thank you all so much. Really appreciated hearing what you had to share about your work. While listening to you both and watching the slides cycle through, one of the titles of your work, Alberta, really became louder and louder, which is how flexible can we make the mouth? And I'm curious to know, is that a question? Is it a statement? Is it a provocation? It just seems to really resonate with what you're both sharing through your practices and what you're thinking about and feeling right now with your work. And so I'm wondering if we might not necessarily speak so much directly to that piece, but just what are you thinking about when you make that question or that statement? How flexible can we make the mouth?
You know, the title came because of this film, you know, Between a Whisper and a Cry. And like I said at the beginning, this is one of the first films I really started exploring my own textual voice and my own poetry. And what I realized was that speaking words aloud and really thinking about how you read and where the room for pause, but also for allowing words to kind of almost collapse and hang, felt really important. And punctuation has become a really big part of my practice because of that title. Because what I realize is sometimes I forget to breathe. So while I'm talking, I'm like, big gasp, because I've suddenly forgotten to breathe. And, you know, it's really hard for me to actually do the breath work unless I remind myself through punctuation. And again, that is literally about thinking about, how am I staying alive while I'm talking? How am I staying alive? How am I actually like processing this energy? And so much energy comes from conversation. So it's also about giving myself that time and space. And punctuation as a visible motif has found its way in the poetry, but also in some of my installation shots. You'll see that it's now become furniture as well as part of the installation, because I really hope for the audience to also give themselves space to rest and really sit with the work. So seating devices have become really integral, but it is very much about, it's learnt through language, and it's learned about that orality, because in my culture, you know, the written word is meant to be spoken aloud. It's not just about reading something. And even though I find myself, because I want to really take in the writing, I find myself just mumbling it to myself while I'm reading it, so I take it in a much more bodily and present way. Yeah, I hope that answers that.
Got a question over here.
I'm so grateful for your conversation, and so many helpful ideas came up. And I noticed that a bunch of things, but you mentioned jazz, Alberta, and then you pointed out in Carmen's talking about working in and working out. And I used to dance, and I've always thought rhythm is almost like we all have rhythm fingerprints, you know, but of course there's not one. We have a bunch of them, and I just wondered if either of you feel some sense of personal rhythms, or just any thoughts that come to you about that in your work or your being. Thanks.
I need to walk. It's like a practice for me. So there's like that rhythm, and it's very specific. And I guess also like when I wake up, I do like my rituals. I tend to my chickens. I make coffee. I make art early in the morning. So in that way, like the art making and the chicken tending and the coffee are all like the same. The walking is all the same. And then I find myself like constantly calming myself by like movement. Just as the awareness of my own body grows, I kind of am able to give myself like the movements that I need to like stay there.
Rhythm is so important. It is so important. Like when I'm editing or when I'm making, I'm constantly like dancing in the studio, and there's always this backing and forthing. So often, even if I'm editing like on my laptop, I'll put it like on a standing desk and then dance and move around to really get a sense of how it's feeling, so the film feels more like a sculpture. I can't think of the film as a flat, two-dimensional thing. It has to be a full three-dimensional, 360 degrees feeling. And I was telling Amanda earlier this week, you know, when the score was developed, my dear friend Richie Carey, who is just the most incredible human being, he was talking with me about, you know, what is the feeling I want the audience to have as they take in this work. And I said, I want it to feel like you're in the ocean and the water has pulled you down and chewed you up for a second, but then you come up for air, and then you're back down again, and then you're up again. And it's about that constant negotiation with your own body, but with the waves. I mean, I'm a complete water baby, so being in the waves is really important. And that kind of, those layers of uncertainty, but also how do you hold yourself and move with water? And you have to relax your body. You can't hold yourself stiff in the water, it's impossible. And so that's what the hope is in watching the film, is that you are also allowing yourself to be loose, you know, and improvise as the rhythm of the film moves you.
Yeah. As you were sharing, I was like, oh, the rhythm, it finally connected with me too. Like the way the bodies of works are made, it's like an intense, like I'll make like 20 rubbings and then it'll stop and it'll pivot and it'll go into a different thing. Maybe it's, you know, and they're like concurrent, so the comforting objects are going on concurrent with, you know, maybe it's the gynecological drawings, and then the comforting objects stop and the gynecological drawings keep going for longer, and then something else will pick up. So there's like starts and stops, and it's very interesting to me how the desire and drive and almost like obsession will be there, and then it'll cease and pivot. And in the pivots, it's like something has been worked out, so now it's like either a conversation, like a question has been asked, or like, you know, a new question is posed. So that's like a rhythm as well.
And we were talking, Carmen, too, in like installing the work, like curatorially, there's something that happens where, like, what did we say? Like, you're the composer and I'm like, you know, able to like take that.
Yes. It was I'm the composer, you're the conductor, and the work are the musicians.
Yeah. And I thought that was so great because, especially for presenting works, I think in the context of all three of these shows, where it is like, you know, you're telling a story. You're telling a story in some cases of conversations and works that's still in process or still in its process of becoming, which is such a gift. I think Alberta and Carmen will both be here and be here and walking through the shows, and we'll have the opportunity also for just other questions that you might have or want to ask of them. But I just want to thank you both for being so generous and so warm and so open in this conversation. And with us at ICALA, it really is a gift to be able to present your work here. The works will stay on, the exhibitions will stay on view up until September, so we have a beautiful 4 months of living with them. Oscar Hisar, Director of Learning Engagement, and Tanya Collette B, also in LNE, have an amazing season of programs ahead, including collaborative actions with Carmen and her collaborators. So please come back and visit us, spend time with these shows. Thank you all for being here today. Enjoy.